Hello, hello. I am Ilaria, consultant at Aerodyne, and in this episode of the Diamond Insights TV Digital Health mini-series, I speak to Tim Ongst, Associate Professor of Pharmacy and Digital Health influencer and blogger. Here's my 3 top takeaways from the interview. Firstly, digital health is an umbrella term that also encompasses digital medicine and digital therapeutics, with products that, in this order, require different level of evidence and validation to be used. Secondly, the therapeutic areas with the greatest potential are cardiometabolic and oncology, because diseases in these areas are now considered chronic, with patient support and management really making a difference to make lives longer. Lastly, as new generations with increased digital literacy become the average patients, digital health will eventually just become health. Continue watching to know more, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hello, thank you for tuning into this exciting episode of Diamond Insights TV. I'm Ilaria, consultant at Aerodyne, and I'm joined today by Timothy Ongst, Associate Professor of Pharmacy Practice and Digital Health Expert and Influencer. Tim, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to demystifying the huge world of digital health with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Perfect. So let me start with the first question, a very broad one that I will ask you to answer in the shortest way possible. So how would you define digital health to someone who's never heard about it?
That is so tough. That is one of the toughest questions I always get asked. So I'm going to give you my short answer. It's an umbrella term. So digital health is a nice way of encapsulating different areas that I would say are silos in there, whether it's like AI right now, whether it's mobile health, whether it's digital therapeutics, digital medicine. People even go down personalized medicine, and then throw genomics under this current umbrella. So it's a very much umbrella term. There are different perspectives around the world. EU looks at it one way. The FDA has their own digital center of excellence they just rolled out, but they don't even really exactly define what digital health is. And the reason I think this is it's a constantly evolving landscape where we just don't know what new technology is going to come out in the next 5 to 10 years. And for us to have a set definition is going to be kind of I think it will set us back. So in many ways for me, when I look at digital health, it's definitely a technological advancement of how we use technology to embrace patient care and different services than we didn't do in the past, almost like digitalization of healthcare. But to me, eventually digital health just becomes health. The question is I think this whole digital health term is just an interim definition that helps most people understand where we're currently at.
Right, I love that definition. Digital health is not digital health, it's just health 2.0, right? The way we're living it today. So from what you just said, it can mean so many and maybe too many things, right? So can you help me think of the best ways to structure our thinking around it and create almost macro categories, macro thematic categories? Would it make sense to segment it along the healthcare value chain? So I don't know, discovery, clinical development, manufacturing, etc. Or as you've mentioned before, type of application, so mobile health, digital therapeutics. So can you walk me through your rationale there?
So I would say in terms of a macro view, I just say digital health is more of the bigger umbrella, but then I break into smaller subsets. So right now I go digital health, then digital medicine, and then digital therapeutics. And the reason I say that is I think you could put little categories broadly under digital health, like whether it's health and wellness, whether it's remote patient monitoring and such. And then when you go to digital medicine, the evidence level uptakes a little bit more. And when you get to digital therapeutics, the expectation uptakes a little bit more. And to me, I think it's rules and regulatory that come into play for each of those. Digital health is overall not too much, but once you start making higher levels of claims of what you can do with that technology, then the expectation goes up, and then you get delineation where you get higher expectation. And I think this actually matters because then the payers want to know that as well, because if they're going to pay for or subsidize or utilize any of this stuff, they're going to want evidence to support its use versus saying oh, I just have an app that helps you feel better, versus what level of better can I expect? What can my members expect? What are the outcomes I should expect? What should be the monitoring for this? What is the economics of use? And what is the value at the end of the day? So that's how I kind of break it down further.
Right, thank you so much. So now if we almost approach it from a therapeutic area perspective, what do you think is the therapy area that has seen the most benefit from this revolution, right? And is there one that you think has the greatest unmet potential today?
Okay, so there's two sides there. From a clinical standpoint, I would say cardiometabolic is one. I think in the digital health space, we've seen probably what's going to be the most long-standing outcome associated. And what I mean by that is like long-term cardiometabolic syndromes, like we're worried about CAD, cardiovascular issues, heart failure and such, long-term untreated. Diabetes, retinopathy, neuropathy, nephropathy, kidney damage as well associated. So what I think we're seeing is instead of waiting for patients to progress that far, how do we intervene earlier? And by using health coaching and other stuff and basically spot checking patients and working with them in real time, I think that can help get these diseases controlled and would reduce costs for their significant high cost issues later on. Stop people from having a heart attack, stop people from having to go on dialysis, for instance, which we know costs a lot of money. The problem with that is you need to do that at a large scale. You need a lot of patients then to make, I think, the financial impact for a business to operate. So I think we're going to see global large uptakes of like virtual care around this stuff. I think that's going to be amazing. And to me, that falls under very much the digital health space. Now, you asked me like what other issues are out there. I think oncology is going to be an area that's going to be hit a lot. I think we're reaching a point with cancer where it's no longer like you're diagnosed with cancer and you think that you have only so many years left. It's turning into very much of a chronic condition, which means we have to rethink how do we tackle people who have cancer and how they go about their lives with a chronic condition and the complications associated with a long-term life that we didn't really see 20, 30 years ago. And I think this is going to revamp our monitoring and real-world evidence in terms of approaches and best practices for these patients. And to me, that's where I see digital health and maybe even finer tuning down to digital medicine, digital therapies, collecting digital biomarkers and such about how to manage these patients. That could be a new area that will grow out. And I also say it for a lot of autoimmune conditions and such and rare conditions. I think that's going to be the magic spot where we can get more data that we just didn't have in the past because we didn't have enough patients for traditional studies to do. But now using this technology, we can get more data and more meaningful impact from it.
Right. I'm very curious about this oncology point because we know that oncology is almost the cash cow of pharma companies as of today. So can you think of, like, are you thinking of a specific example when you're saying that with digital health, oncology treatment and oncology can be completely revolutionized?
Yeah, I think there's multiple things going on. I think what we can expect is what we've seen is a turning point where we're seeing oral oncology medications come to the forefront. We're also seeing a transition from infusion centers to people exploring, subcutaneous design of drugs for that. So that means almost the home becomes the center of care. Patients aren't really thinking of themselves, I have to go to an infusion center to get treatment. It's almost like I'm gonna be at home getting treatment. Along with that is a supportive system associated with that. Like what other psychological support can we offer these patients in social networks? How can we digitalize those things in support groups virtually? We've seen success with that with other groups out there already, like Patients Like Me has done that in the past and accomplished that. So I see support, I see pharmaceutical companies, others kind of making almost like a drug or therapy plus a digital medicine, digital therapy, digital medicine collecting the evidence and data, to see like, what other complications are associated with the therapies or other benefits associated with it. And then along with the digital therapies, maybe other supportive outcomes for the patient as a whole with cancer versus just treating the disease itself, treating the patient overall and the complications associated with that, especially if there are other side effects due to therapy, if there's other side effects due to the disease progression, and then also post-recovery if they need and require any long-term therapy associated with it or adjunctive therapy for any disease complications that may still linger around, for instance. And I think that's what we just don't know is like, what will that kind of patient look like?
Right. Thank you so much. And I want to pick on this idea of data, right? Because you mentioned real world evidence, which is almost happening after. But something that we've looked at is also the data that comes before the clinical trial, right? The data that can help select the best patient population for clinical trials that can expedite that development and target it better, right? Can you talk to that?
Yes, and I think that's the reason why we see a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are really engaged in a lot of these digital health startups that are really aimed around gathering patients. I mean, there's a whole slew of those companies out there. We know that. And either they're there to almost be as a service to recruit patients, to help guide patients, to provide the technology for remote patient monitoring, almost like taking a CRO to the next level, I would almost say. And I think the companies themselves recognize that pharma is, it's estimated they're spending billions of dollars now to bring some of these macromolecules to market. And they're spending so much money per patient. If they lose a patient in a clinical trial, that could set them back. And we've seen that with some major drug approvals that just happened. Like I look at Novartis, for instance, with Entresto was looking at HFpEF. And they came in trouble because they missed their endpoint by I think about 6 or 7 patients. on clinical results. And it's like, what if you could have just, kept a few more patients in there? What would that have done? What would that actually have achieved? And I think, someone's going to be looking at this like, how do we keep our patients better? How do we retain them? How do we not achieve, more dropout associated with this stuff? How do we, and what other information can we gather that we never had in the past about these patients, especially their social history? Can we drag in social determinants of health? Can we drag in other biomarkers, digital biomarkers that can also help with our drug expansions? And then also, I think the gold thing is, can we find novel uses for our therapy we never even thought about in the past? And then can we explore that? And I think that's the thing that stands out to me is people are looking at this and they're recruiting like this population, can we spin out to another analysis as well, where we can then extend the lifeline of medications to downstream.
Right, thank you so much. And then to finish, I have two questions, which again are quite general and bring the conversation to a high level. So across all of this conversation that we've had, we mentioned some success factors, like for example, making sure to target the three stakeholders. But if you had to, almost describe success in digital health, what would that be? And I appreciate that can be very difficult because that definition is itself evolving over time.
I mean, success is multivariate because we're talking about just patient. We have many founders that get into space that review success as they made a difference in patient lives, and then I would say many are successful. Many of those founders' companies have folded, not around. If we measure success by sticking around and making and going public and having a financial product, then it's much smaller, I would say. And I think it's demonstrated back to what I said earlier about being able to meet most of those stakeholders. There are, like, I'll give an example. Like, I really focus on a lot of medication adherence and drug design, and I mean product design at the end of the day. And we've seen many of these companies not make it at this current time. They haven't cracked this nugget. I mean, medication adherence is often viewed as like this golden egg that's a $300-500 billion problem. It is, and it's medication optimization. But in any event, you have all these people trying to get just even a small slice of that pie, and they still haven't achieved it. And I think when I look at that, are those companies successful? And I would say they are making a difference. They are doing stuff, but they're doing much more than what they probably expect themselves to do. And none of them have had a blowout that they wanted originally. So I would say, because I still think digital health mainstream is still 5 to 10 years out, these small victories by like companies like Livongo, the telehealth and stuff, are the early on-comers of the success stories that you probably want, because they are the early signs of digitalization of healthcare. As we get to these other alternative means and all other pie in the sky kind of services, I don't expect any true winners at this time because they still are racing towards that finish line. And until they get into it in the next 5 to 10 years, we're not going to see many success stories. They need to basically set the bar for themselves and their competitors of what do they need to pass to satisfy all the key stakeholders to then call themselves a success story.
Right, thank you. So I'll ask one last question. And here I always want you to grab an imaginary crystal ball and have a stab at answering this. So you talked about 5-10 year horizon, but if you look beyond that, what do you think healthcare, digital healthcare, right, will look like in 20-30 years from now? And what will be the patient journey then?
Okay, so if I had to do this, if I had to look into my crystal ball and I had to tell you what I thought in 20 to 30 years this is all going to look like, I expect that we will see huge changes in terms of what we've seen as a society. I think healthcare turns very consumer-centric. We want things on demand as quick as possible, almost Amazonification of healthcare, but also personalized that we never had in the past. So associated with that, what I would expect to see is that 20, 30 years, I will be a patient. I will have now encumbered some chronic conditions. But because I have grown up in a very digital lifestyle, I'll be much more ready and to adapt to having a chronic disease and expect to be using tools and services that go beyond a smartphone. That allows me to connect with providers and maybe different levels of devices, machines that will help me with my therapy overall. And I think that's something that that's why I'm passionate here, is I often see like I'm helping design or aim for what is going to happen to me as I get older. I don't think a lot of stuff we're working on now is going to actually really truly make a huge difference for the wide and definite population at this current time. Some of it, yes. But I think in 20, 30 years, almost all the designers and people who are focused on this will see the benefits for themselves and their other loved ones and their peers, because we are now growing in this generation that is very rapt to use this stuff, and it's going to be as part of our life, overall life. Like, we grew up in the age of Uber, we grew up in the age of having things delivered to us. We lived through a pandemic where social cues and everything else are virtual. Expecting our health and everything else to transition beyond that, I think it's going to become the norm and the default. And I think for many companies that they understand this will aim for that. They're not necessarily designing for healthcare today. They're definitely designing for healthcare and the digitalization of society in that time frame. So that would be, if I look at my crystal ball.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And here I'll wrap it up. And I want to thank you very much, Tim, for your time and invaluable insights today. So it has been very interesting to get your thoughts and perspective on digital health and how we can wrap our heads around it and start imagining how, as you said, will change the world of healthcare in the years to come. So once again, I'm Ilaria, and thank you for watching Diamond Insights TV. Please tune into our next mini-series with our next episode on digital health, which will adopt a bit more of a pharma company lens and have a more competitive take. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.